Good morning. My name is Cynthia McCullough, and with my co-chair, Dr. Elliot Siegel, we welcome you to this industry panel discussion. We have the provocative title, Justifying AI Without ROI, Return on Investment. And we have with us 5 leaders from industry who are working in the field and are aware of both the promise that we are seeing more and more of daily, but also the realities of trying to integrate and bring these technologies into the medical environment. So we look forward to an engaging discussion today. Elliot?
Thanks. Just as an introductory comment, just seems like yesterday when we made the transition as the world's first filmless radiology department from film to digital operations. We hired a economic expert from Johns Hopkins, Charles Flagel, who ended up studying our performance and output and did all sorts of time motion studies. And we ended up publishing the results looking at return on investment. But as time went on, I think people really tended to ignore, the scientific study on return on investment with sort of a consensus that, well, it doesn't really matter return on investment if you really want to have the ability to interpret large numbers of CT or MR studies. You need to have a digital workstation. If you want to have the capability to have certain things, you absolutely have to have it. And so the discussion changed within a relatively short number of years to everybody asking at conferences to describe return on investment, and that discussion stopped. And so I guess the question is, where are we in the implementation of AI along the curve of, to what extent does return on investment matter? At this point, in 2021, my own belief is that we are right in the midst of everyone asking the question about return on investment. But I guess we have to define what AI is, and we have to define what return on investment is, and really looking forward to a really fun and engaging discussion with the panelists. And so I'm going to let the panelists just introduce themselves quickly as we end up kicking things off. So Morris, would you like to start?
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Siegel. My name is Morris Panner, and I'm the CEO of Ambra Health. And Ambra Health got its footing in image exchange and really has now moved to be a cloud image management company. We see a lot of interaction with AI as images are moving in various workflows. So this is a very exciting conversation for us to participate in. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Mitch?
Thanks, Elliot. My name is Mitchell Goldberg. I'm the Senior Director of Solutions for Enterprise Imaging and Advocate AI Services at NTT Data. Having been with Elliot when he started that filmless department at the VA there, imaging certainly has come a long way. And with our enterprise imaging solutions, we have formed a service called Advocate AI, which allows for the exchange of information so critical, as we heard in yesterday's lecture. Having access to clinical data for whatever AI is what we're about.
Great, thanks. Dr. Shura?
My name is Mohammed Shura. I'm the founder and the CEO of Maxera Health. We're a global enterprise imaging company. We're also focusing since 4 years on the AI technology. I've been myself an AI engineer since long time during my PhD work, and that time it was called neural network. So glad to be here again.
Great to have you too. Dan?
Good morning. Thanks for having me. I'm also looking forward very much to this discussion. You hit on some of the relevant points there just in your intro, Elliot. So I'm the president of Terra Recon. We're a leader in advanced visualization. We're incorporating AI not just in our core advanced visualization solution, but also developing a platform to more of an inference engine to help hospitals, providers, payers manage just the sheer number of applications that they're looking to deploy across their enterprises. So really looking forward to the discussion today.
Great, thanks. And Dr. Lin?
Hi, my name is Ming. Yeah, thank you for the invitation to be a part of this panel. The Director for Clinical Research for Visage Imaging. I also hold an adjunct professor appointment at Yale University. And a fair amount of the work I do is around academic industry partnerships. So really looking forward to the discussion here. Thank you.
Great. Thank you all. So I'm going to kick things off and ask Mitch a question. Not everybody here is in business per se, and many of us are researchers and academicians creating AI algorithms. What do you mean by ROI, and what is that, and why is that a good thing? And when we talk about ROI for AI, how would you define ROI and how would you define AI to kick things off?
Great 6 questions in one sentence. Let's see how I can do. So I think artificial intelligence is an interesting challenge, right? AI and intelligent automation, right? Just the reversal of the letters. I think AI has a lot of, when you talk about workflow, could be intelligent automation, but in artificial intelligence goes beyond that, especially when it comes to medical imaging. You're looking at transforming the complex processes of a radiologist, cardiologist, or any kind of physician, dermatologist, pathologist, to assimilate information. And it's through that model of assimilation that you're trying to extract, replicate, and meet that you can also look for ROI, meaning something that is an improvement over or equivalent to what you're doing today. In the assimilation of information, everyone has a context. And if you are looking at the not intelligent automation, but the artificial intelligence, the assimilation of extracting how physicians process the information they're not acutely aware of absorbing, as a patient that walks into an office, as when the chest image makes you feel good. What does that mean as a radiologist? We all have some biases, and biases based on the size of the image, the display, the environment. So the second definition of return on investment is not only the performance of the algorithm in terms of its detection of what's in the image, but how well it assimilates the information, and the ROI to one of my colleagues or many of the people on this conference could just be, how well does it meet what I do? Yeah, it improves upon what I do. Mm-hmm.
So let me underscore some of the things that you mentioned and part of the rationale for the question. One rationale for the question is AI. In other words, has AI just arrived in the last few years, or is AI pretty much everything that gets embedded with modalities? And have we already had AI for a lot of years, but now we're just calling something new AI that uses deep learning, for example, as a new way to generate algorithms? And so I think your general definition of AI, meaning things that look, that replace what humans might have thought of as intelligent operations, and that things that seem to be emulating human intelligence, such as making findings, improving image quality, improving efficiency. I think that should probably be the definition of AI rather than the narrow definition of the new deep learning algorithms. And as far as return on investment, I agree with you completely that it's not just the dollars that you get back in investment, but it's really what do you end up getting from a monetary perspective, economic perspective, but also safety perspective, patient care perspective, et cetera. And I think those are all things that really should be included when we think about ROI. So thanks for kicking things off really nicely. Dr. McCullough?
Yeah, and I think in some of our conversations in preparing for this session, there was an analogy made to seatbelts. They were a feature that you paid for, and it improved safety. And then seatbelts became, mandatory, part of the fabric of an automobile, no pun there, because of what they offer. And so that return of investment is that big picture of what it offers to society, to medicine, though companies, of course, no money, no mission. So it's interesting balance.
But Dr. McCullough, in that same conversation, I thought it was very insightful, but because if you don't put your seatbelt on and you get that ding, 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 if you remember in the conversation, it was a how can we change behavior, and is there a reminder associated with that, like with seatbelts? That was very clever.
So there is a resource that is posted in the chat, and this is a link to the summary of a survey that was done. Mitch is co-chair of the Industry Liaison Committee for CIM, and they did this survey, and so a summary of the results are there, where they worked with their other industry partners and answered some of these type questions. So big thanks to Mitch and Michael LaChance for doing that work. Ming, I've got a question in terms of metrics. What do you think are meaningful metrics to use to determine if an AI algorithm is worth the cost, worth the investment by the industry partner and by the academic partner?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think some of the metrics that could be considered, one of them, for example, is the aims of the Institute for Healthcare Improvement. So does that algorithm help to improve the patient outcomes? Does it lower the cost? Is there a better experience for both the patient and also for the doctor as well? There's also other components of it where it's more sort of reading between the lines, in the sense of you may have a really well operating AI algorithm, but does it integrate well with the existing ecosystem at that hospital? Is it deeply integrated, or is it just merely a desktop shortcut that launches another application? So looking to see, does it add complexity and interrupt workflow, or is it really streamlined and seamlessly integrated? And some other thoughts too is, well, how long does it take to run that inference? If it takes a couple minutes, may not be so popular for actual routine clinical use. But if there are ways where that AI can be integrated so that your results, your inference results are available almost at an instant, then that can really help with adoption. So all of these things, I think, come into play in trying to see, is that AI algorithm really worth that cost?
So those are all really good thoughts about how we decide, is it working? Is it worth all the time and energy? But I liked Elliot's story, though it's a little scary, the idea of how much of a study, very detailed economic experts looking at the entire chain of care and assessing monetary values to things like, days in the hospital and do you get out faster? That is a massive undertaking, and look how many different algorithms and types of applications we have. I think things are going to be driven by consensus and the gut of the physician. Is it helping? Are we getting better outcomes? More so than the kind of study that Elliot described. So I'd love to see that done.
As would I. So Dan, I've got a question for you, and that is that the session is called Justifying AI Without ROI. But one question is is there return on investment at this point from your perspective? And does one need to have CPT code reimbursement for there to be actual measurement of return on investment? How do you interact with customers with regard to AI about the story about return on investment? And do you get a return on investment if there is not a CPT code that's reimbursing it?
Yeah, thanks. And we've touched on this a little bit here. Sometimes ROI can become a little bit of a lazy term, right? So I do hear from from people in the market where they're looking for it directly related to a CPT code, right? So they're looking for it directly related to revenue. If I think back a couple of years, a lot of vendors were trying to, in a binary way, and customers expected it, link it more towards cost out, right? So it was more on the cost outside. I think we need to get back to, my opinion, I think we need to get back to what was discussed here earlier, mentioned, is it's really this concept of value for the investment. And it's around what problem is the institution trying to solve? Is it clinical? Is it cost? Is it access? Is it quality? Is it reduction in variation? And it's going to be challenging to put hard science around that. And there is a law of diminishing return. So, I find that the velocity of going from, you mentioned, Dr. McCullough, you mentioned the seatbelt, right? The velocity of going from the new cool thing to just, you have to have it, right? And it's expected to be part of the modality or part of the underlying system is so quick now that I don't even know if you'd be able to complete a fully, a fully robust ROI study before it's just expected to be included. So I think it's more around specific problem that the institution is trying to solve, and that combination of art and science. We're making those ROI decisions on a regular basis. I mean, what's the ROI for having 6 nurses on the floor versus 5, right? There's some science around that, and then there's some art around that, depending on, what outcomes you're trying to deliver.
Thanks. And do you see, when you're talking with your customers, a requirement that they're, asking you to help them with justification of ROI? And do you see differences in the U.S. with the international market also, as far as how they're justifying some of these expenditures and purchases?
So to answer in reverse order, I'm not really seeing a difference in how they're justifying purchases, right? I think to a certain extent, the concept of, is there value for what I'm paying for? Now, the definition of value is going to be different, right, for different institutions, and their sort of how they think through the actual purchasing process, and even how they think through how they're delivering value. But I think the underlying thought process is, is the same as we're seeing. And from a what value are we providing? I go back to some of the comments that were that were made here before. I think they become pretty personal decisions. From the vendor side, it's interesting. We do get asked to provide an ROI all the time, but I'm well aware that I think customers, purchasers are usually skeptical of a vendor provided ROI, as I am in my own personal life, right? When I'm looking to justify a purchase. And so I think it really does get back to that consensus piece. Part of the challenge, I think, in a good way we have is many of these solutions, it's taken for granted that they're going to help in some way, right? So it's not controversial that many of these AI applications are going to provide value. So some of it isn't even, is it going to provide value versus not, or even is the cost worth the value? It's just a prioritization within the institution of where that sits based on what challenges they're trying to address.
Thanks, Dan. Cynthia?
So a question for Morris, and this is kind of a easy lob. So I'm going to have you maybe unpack it a little bit. So the question is basically, in 5 years, say 10 years, what percentage of patient care do we expect will have a necessary AI component embedded into it?
So the short answer, which may be why this is so easy, is I would argue that we are close to 100% right now. In other words, it is so infused across our system, as Dr. Siegel mentioned in the intro, that it's hard to imagine that algorithms are not present in everything we do. It runs behind almost everything we do. So the way I would think about that question is from a persona point of view. And I think maybe people listening today have sort of 3 personas. There's the developer persona. In other words, people are trying to figure out how to commercialize to meet that demand 5 to 10 years in the future. There's the buyer persona, who's trying to future-proof and be strategic about how to enable their institution to be successful in 5 to 10 years. And then there's a provider who may or may not feel very technical. Some of this is, I think, a reflection of how fast our almost educational system has to change around what it takes to be a physician in this new age. But many people feel a little overwhelmed by it. And so what I really think is happening right now is we're looking at a way to structure our engagement with this so that we're understanding our workflows in an algorithmic way. And to me, it all goes back to, if you go to the financial industry, I don't know whether it was 10 or 15 years ago, they thought of banking as something done by people who had great lunches and were really skilled at making connections. And now the people who run banking may not even be human. I mean, there's just an unbelievable number of algorithms running behind all that. And in JP Morgan's boardroom, it's filled with people with deep technical knowledge. And I think that's the direction we're going in 5 to 10 years. And that's going to enable us to do a lot of wonderful and exciting things. So part of what we advocate with our customers is you're making an investment right now in future-proofing a system that is going in this direction. Exactly how is, I don't think is knowable. But the notion that this technology innovation isn't going to allow you to bear risk better, isn't going to allow you to change the way you subspecialize more effectively, all of those things are going to happen. How exactly is unclear. So I think what I take out of this and why I'm so bullish about what we're doing as a society is we are becoming part of the curriculum of life, and not just within the 4-year training, but for the ongoing process. And so we emphasize more than anything else, take a part of your day and invest in understanding where all of this is going, because it's just vital for how we're going to shape our world going forward.
All right, thanks for expounding on that. I like the different perspectives there. Elliot.
So I've got a question for you, Mohammed, and that is, there seemed to be something that's really kind of new and in some ways exciting, and that is the emergence of so many different startup companies that are offering all sorts of different types of medical algorithms. I can't, during my career, remember any other time when it hasn't just been the major modality vendors, for example, and a tiny number of others, but now there are hundreds of these startups that are offering AI algorithms. But at this point, if you take a look at the penetration of the market of those many startups, it's really relatively small. And so I agree with Morris's point that AI really is already pervasive in so many different ways, but that's because it's being delivered by the larger vendors. What do you think about what are some of the challenges right now as far as barriers to these startups being able to convince customers about the return on investment?
So unfortunately, there is a lot of, which it's a good thing that we have seen at RSNA one time at the AI Pavilion. There is more than 100 AI startups, everybody claiming that they will release a huge and great algorithms. And so far, after 3 years, we haven't seen almost anything. We still, everybody's talking about the same algorithm, just X-ray, maybe mammo and stroke and brain CT. And the reason is, in my opinion, the integration. So first of all, they haven't really integrated with the healthcare system and academic center because they used to raise a lot of money. Those startups have raised in the last 3 years around $1.5 billion from VC investment. And those money were going into a young, great minds that they were trying to develop algorithms, but they were not integrated in our world, which is they don't understand PACS, they don't understand imaging, they are not connected with radiologists. They were trying to go round after round and raise every time 10 million, 20 million, 30 million to buy data, to get access to academic centers to start running algorithm. And actually, frankly speaking, as I mentioned before, again, during the 2002 to 2005, I was somehow an AI engineer, and that was like my work during my PhD. I'm doing some neural network, and that time it was really difficult. Now we have supercomputers in our hand, and we have like huge bandwidth, internet, and resources a lot. So nowadays, or again, even like for the last 5 years, developing algorithm is not that difficult, because most of the algorithm are again trying to look into a feature in an image, like few pixels that is, let's say, white, and then maybe that's a tumor. Actually, like the exaggeration of the funding and like a huge number of startups that actually, like some of them disappeared, was a pure example that there's no integration. I remember Dr. Siegel 7-8 years ago when we met, maybe the second time or first time at the ACR conference. You told me about a company called Waze, and you told me, Muhammad, again, look into this company. It's a great, just acquired by Google. And what happened is Waze provided somehow an AI algorithms for our work for our journey, like when we're driving, so they provide a viewer for maps, right? And they start building some algorithm to help us, during the navigation. And what happened, Google, that like the foundation company, acquired them. And also if we try to make an analogy, Zebra was acquired by Nanox, which is a modality company. I would imagine with the integration that I could see, like a PAX company acquire an AI startups or just totally integrated them, or a modality company would have that. And experts said that time that the best scenario for Zebra is to be integrated with a modality company, because that will provide the integration. One thing also I want to mention, and also again I will quote also Dr. McCullough during a lecture about the peer learning, and that also referring to the integration again, are we conducting large research again among different data sets in different countries, that again we see also federated learning, that is not happening. So again, every startup going their own way, trying to get free access from data from Stanford, NYU, trying to run some algorithm by again young kids and trying to raise money, and that was not helping.
Thanks. I had a follow-up question to that, Cynthia, if you'll let me do a quick follow-up. And this one's directed to Dan, but really to everybody else. And that is, as we're talking more about individual applications or individual algorithms. What's the return on investment of a platform? Should I invest? There are multiple platforms that are out there. And so even if there's the debate about an investment in an algorithm, should I plan on investing in infrastructure such as a platform? And I'll let you start, Dan, because I know you guys provide a platform, but I'd love to hear from everybody else about is there an ROI for investing in the infrastructure that would allow one to be able to host these? Mohammed talked a little bit about the importance of integration with a PAX, for example, but is it that we want to invest in a PAX that has that support, or is it that we want to invest in a separate platform? So Dan, let you go first.
Yeah, it's a great point, and I actually think that this is the number one answer that needs to happen in order to really drive exponential delivery of AI or any type of point solution, into the provider space. So when I think about it, we've heard you need to be integrated, no question. And we say integrated, it's not just into a system; it's got to be into the workflow. Right. So if it's a separate window or URL launch, that's a loose type of integration, but I don't think that's going to generate a lot of excitement within a process, within a clinical care area. And the other thing that we haven't really touched on, but what's necessary to drive adoption is, or what's necessary to drive it forward is the experience of the clinician, of the user. Right. There's got to be a positive user experience. And so when you think about integrated into the workflow, positive user experience, the question, as I said, that needs to be answered is really, how are these going to be delivered? So, realistically, I don't see a CMIO of a large health system going out and buying 200 individual, point solutions and figuring out how to integrate them. It's just not a scalable model. And so whether it's a standalone platform, right? A standalone neutral platform inference engine that can help manage all of the AI from different vendors, as well as AI that each institution is developing. I think that's absolutely going to play a part. I think there will be applications where it makes sense to be, embedded in the modality or embedded in the PACS or embedded in the EMR. I think there'll be, because the workflows take place there, I think there'll be aspects there. But I don't know. I think those will be the two largest. What I am fairly certain of is it's not going to be 200 individual point solutions for a variety of reasons. Some of them just commercial, right? Who can manage buying and
scalability, I would imagine.
Totally.
From your perspective and Visaj's perspective, mean, should I, as a customer, and I am, looking into all these possibilities, should I, as a customer, look forward to a return on investment as we are talking about it by going with a platform, or is the PAX platform essentially going to provide all that for me?
So I think it's going to depend. It's going to depend
I
on.
was asking Min that question actually.
Sorry.
But thanks. Yeah. And so I agree. It depends. And maybe you could add just a sentence or two after Ming, but thanks.
Yeah. I think I'll give an example. So like what we've done at Yale University is by using the Visage PACS platform, we actually use it for both as of course, the diagnostic side, but also for the clinical research side. And the reason that we went forward like that is because we found that it really helps to facilitate and accelerate that translation from, I've got a really cool idea, a concept, and I want to take it beyond just PubMed, but actually bring it into clinical practice. And that's really because the tools that the radiologists use for data curation, annotation, labeling, et cetera, these are the same tools that would be used in the diagnostic platform and also research environment. There's no need to learn another set of new softwares or even need to physically move to another building to access a research-only computer. And so all the more important during this whole pandemic time where at Yale, we were able to still move forward with research because of the accessibility. You just need an internet connection. And furthermore, for the radiologists, they get to use their diagnostic workstation to do that actual labeling and annotation work. So not needing to use just a regular PC monitor, but their full resolution systems. And at the end of the day, it really helps to, once the AI algorithm is developed and goes through regulatory, it's a straightforward transition to go from that research system to the clinical production. And so, yeah, we've had a number of wonderful successes there in bringing that concept into through clearance.
And sharing that though, I guess the question, and I'll let Mitch, because you've got your hand up, answer it. In other words, at Yale or University of Maryland or any place else, should I invest in a platform at this point, or is it kind of too premature to determine whether I should have a platform outside my PACS or whether the PACS should be the platform for AI itself? I agree with you that having an infrastructure shared between research and clinical operations makes great sense. But I guess one question we have is whether or not we should actually start investing in a platform, looking at an ROI on that in particular. Mitch?
So I think there's two points to make. One is your original question to me was, what is AI, right? So AI for triage clearly can belong in something that's on premise and maybe intercepts the data as it comes in, the different types of data. There's the labeling that Dr. Lin was talking about that clearly would be best served pre-display of the study. But I think there's several vendors on this call that are also in parallel. We have to consider that PACS on-prem is where, banking. I used to go to borrow Morris's idea. I used to know what a teller was, right? And it was a human being and they'd give me a lollipop and all that. Now PACS is moving to the cloud. And, many of the vendors here have some great success stories of moving huge volume, huge enterprises outside of the on-prem. So I'm not sure that the answer of a platform which intones one solution that's on site versus one solution that's associated with the PACS outside of my on-prem is a uniform answer, or is there a right answer? I just think we need to consider both.
Thanks. Yeah, it reminds me of a great feature that I'd love to see in my workstation, and that is every once in a while when I do something good, it would spit out a lollipop for me, just like your teller. Morris.
Yeah, I'd like to echo what Mitch said. And I think what's tricky about the platform discussion right now, abstracted from the workflow discussion, is it's hard to buy platforms before you know the workflows you're solving for, because that is going to drive the solution. And I think about all of the industries that have transformed to platforms, and whether that's supply chain or finance or even enterprise accounting, if you look at where that came, it really was driven by resolution around what kind of workflow people were going to want to use. And one of the complexities is right now, I think there is an open question about what the fundamental workflow is for imaging. There's a legacy workflow that's very clear, which is an RVU-based report generating workflow. That's very clear. But imaging is becoming a core asset for almost everything. And you made the point at the beginning how this is not a session or a society about just radiologists, but not only radiologists. It's really become not just other ologies, but also people who are doing all sorts of life-changing research and development. And that makes the platform hard to settle on at the moment. And it's not a diss against any platform, and many of them may be very valuable, even within the context of limited information about a workflow. But ultimately, I think we're in the middle of that debate.
Yeah, and I think your point about radiology not being an island in and of itself makes you wonder whether a platform should extend just in radiology or across diagnostic specialties or even across the electronic medical record. And should that platform be idiosyncratic to radiology per se? Dan, I left you with that you had a comment saying it depends. And so maybe just a quick comment. Cynthia's been incredibly patient with me. And so maybe one quick comment about the platforms, and then I'll turn it over to Cynthia.
Yeah, and I don't think there's going to be one answer. So I think there are going to be applications and workflow solutions that may make sense to be in a sit in one type of system somewhere other than maybe it sits on the modality. And then, and I also think there are going to be a universe of applications that may make sense to be housed, that will actually do make sense to be housed in some type of platform. So I don't think it's a one size fits all. I think as AI permeates and there are hundreds and hundreds of these workflow solutions there, they're going to have to realistically be housed in different places.
Thanks. Dr. McCullough?
I had actually just wanted to, before we move on, follow up on Mohammed's comment about the so many small startups with really bright people creating these algorithms. My career has been focused on CT imaging, and October 1st of this year is the 50th anniversary of the first patient CT scan. And so I kind of am a history buff for that field. And at one point, there were 23 different companies making and selling CT scans.
Wow.
That collapsed and condensed into the big companies that had the experience in the medical arena. EMI is kind of a case study in business schools about how they developed the change the future, but they did not know the medical environment and ecosystem. And so all those really bright people coming up with algorithms do have to get integrated into, how do we put that in place? So I just see a strong similarity there. Okay, so Mitch, a good question for you in terms of how much information we can start to present in a more holistic sense. Right now, algorithms look for the presence or absence of this disease, this condition. At what point do you think we will have algorithms that can look at the health of an entire organ system, or even start giving health grades to the digital avatars? Where do you see that vision going?
Great question. To echo Dr. Shimura, right? The billions that are being poured in are all about point diseases, not the health of the organ. So I think the time frame is unclear because the availability of heuristic data sets. We heard some great discussions yesterday and great talks about accessing data and the curation of data. Tying that back to this chest image makes me feel good. the amount of data that's being processed. I remember when Dr. Stein at MDAI said, I asked her, how can you tell this is a normal chest? You just read that in 7 seconds. And the answer was, I felt good. So I don't know that there'll be any AI GPU platform that can do it as quickly as a radiologist can do it. And some of that health has to do with lab work. Some of that help has to do with patient history, right? And so taking all of that unstructured data and putting it into a way that can be digested clearly, impacts workflow, right? The health of the patient, the health of the organ. And sometimes the exam is more critical, is this a brain infarct? Right, has nothing to do with the health of the organ. So it's a complicated question, and I think it's being paced by the availability of data. Our work with life sciences and medical imaging is giving us insight into just how difficult that heuristic normality of the organ is to create because of the data sets.
Thanks. I had a question for Mohammed, and that is, one of the things that we're seeing increasingly are academic centers in particular creating their own algorithms and then wanting to utilize those algorithms themselves. I guess one advantage is that you're developing the algorithm in your own geographic location, on your own patient population, on your own CT and MR scanners. Do you think that that's a trend that's going to continue, or do you think that's just an accident of the fact that we're in the really super early stages of algorithm development?
So the dilemma now is like there is those startups that trying to do their best and image processing manner, just like to try to read the pixels, which is, I believe that it is not the right one. But again, some of them are very successful, again, like Zebra and others. And there is also some, again, PACS vendors like us, or again, trying to consolidate the data via marketplace. We still have maybe the problem with the integration and the high cost, and also healthcare systems that are trying to develop, their own thing. The challenges for healthcare systems, like, how they gonna, if they want to develop a new algorithm, they have to donate the data or give the data to somebody to start working on, and maybe it will take them 6 months, a year, or maybe the startup wouldn't find the right business model to show that into their investors to start spending on that. At the same time, let's assume that after they do that and after they publish the algorithms, how much will be the cost? Because investors still, again, chasing them to sell that for $3 a study, and then they have to let you pay for the whole archive, because everything that they are gonna push or upload to the cloud, to their own cloud, you have to pay for it, $2, $3. And even also we have seen the black market for data. There is actually some companies trying to sell data, and we have seen something like that, and sometimes they sell one study for starting from $4 to $16 a study. So that's a big obstacles again it's I think it's gone about integration and how again we as a vendors in the industry understand the industry would again integrate really, again, either absorb those startups or building a platform that can really integrating with the healthcare system data and work with their data scientists and radiologists and approve that. And also you mentioned something else, which is the geographical area, which is also another challenge. So again, let's say again you develop something in India or Pakistan, it's not going to work in US because of the demographics, and so that also a big challenge. I like the article and the study that was done by Mass General Hospital with NVIDIA was published in Nature magazine. It was a federated learning big study across I think 20 hospitals across the globe.
We have a huge shock trauma center at the University of Maryland, and we have some of our researchers that have developed really interesting software, specifically, for example, to quantify amount of bleeding. And, we've wanted to apply it. And the challenge is, what is the mechanism for us to be able to essentially, on scale up, use those algorithms from a clinical perspective. You mentioned a black market for patient data. I can imagine, walking down an alley and having somebody open up a trench coat with a whole bunch of CDs or DVDs of patient data. It's becoming increasingly difficult even for us at my academic institution to be able to, in some ways, mine our own data. And I'm sure as time goes on, people are experiencing different things as far as availability of data. But in some ways, for some of the research we're doing, we're even considering looking at data outside our own institution, even though there's so much data that's available internally, just because of some of those concerns. So, Cynthia.
So hindsight is 2020, and I think most people on this call had been present in their career in the field when we adopted PACS, when we adopted electronic medical records, when we put all our data into archives. And it's been a journey. I don't think that we're done making that journey smooth for every institution, but we learned a lot of lessons along the way. For example, as a medical physicist, we were some of the few technical people in the radiology department. And so when PACS and all this informatics stuff started happening, they look around, they're like, you medical physicists, come here, and now we have imaging informatics specialists, certification, and an organization like CIMI. So that's one lesson learned. We need more technology savvy people. What other things, and I'm going to throw this out to Dan, do you think that looking back, we can do better going forward?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think from my perspective, and I actually look at PACS and EMR as sort of one thing that worked and one thing that didn't work to a certain extent, right? So PACS, the adoption of PACS, we were improving a process, right? It was a pretty mature process. We were improving a process. Whereas with an EMR, and it was homegrown to a certain extent, right? So the pull was there from the clinical side. When I think about EMR and some of the challenges that and pain that in a lot of ways is still out there, it wasn't really about process. It was, first of all, it was driven by outside forces to a certain extent, and it was really just digitizing data. Right. So it wasn't really around the workflow. And my biggest takeaway from that, I touched on it earlier, is around the clinician experience, is the user experience, right? It's critical to drive adoption, unless you have this artificial forcing function, right? Like we had with EMRs. But in a usual marketplace, in a usual clinical setting, in a usual care area, the ultimate measure of success is going to be that people are going to want to use it, and people are going to want to use things not just that drive value. There are a lot of things out there that drive value that people don't use because they don't have a good user experience. So where we're spending a lot of time, and where I think a lot of the learnings for us is there's the business model piece, the ROI piece, the outcomes piece, but it also has to be a very positive user experience. And that's, we've found one of the key drivers to adoption and then to, increased utilization.
Okay, we've got a question from one of the attendees along that same line is, what would the PAC vendors say these AI startups to foster better relationships from the get-go to help drive success and ROI? Kind of what would you tell those AI startup folks to do or not do so that they can better fit in the ecosystem? And I guess I'll throw it out to anyone that wants to comment on that.
I'll take a crack at it. We do that a lot right now. So we actually have a dedicated group within our company that develops partnerships. And so what we do is, from the very start, we probably receive, 1 or 2 inquiries a week. So 100 different inquiries a year from companies that have an algorithm that could help in one aspect of the workflow. And we have a deliberate system of trying to interact with every one of those companies, trying to understand whether there's a customer fit that would be interesting to our customers. And out of that, we've had a variety of outcomes. So we have some of our most successful outcomes when the workflow makes sense for how our customers are using our system. So because we're a fairly distributed system, for people who have algorithms that operate on images in flight, so imagine stroke care or even trauma care, those are very valuable to us because they they coincide with how people can do a better job optimizing their workflow. And so we've really tried to early on invest in that system to have that liaison available all the time to work through those issues. So that's how we've approached it. And there's no single answer to it, but on our side, we invested in it.
Okay.
I could say something as well. I think to add on to what Morris was saying, I think having a conversation, bringing in the radiologists into that discussion about, well, if I have a PAC system, I've got this other AI algorithm. Is it really worth it? Does it show ROI? Let's sit down all together, the three parties, to really work out, well, what is the workflow? How do you intend to see this working in your day-to-day workflow to make sure that it is well integrated, it's not interruptive, and that it flows seamlessly in their experience.
So again, it's getting to know the day-to-day life and the pain points of the people who are going to use the technology. That's what I'm hearing.
And if I can add one other thing, if you look at how AI is used, I think Dr. Lin mentioned this earlier, if you see how it's used in dermatology and surgery, when you do the endoscopy exams, when you look at the ultrasound studies that we heard about yesterday, and in cardiology in particular, it's a different AI, right? It's a different tool, and it has a different integration point, right, for the PACS, because now it's aiding and it's a productivity issue that's different than just the detection or predictive outcome that you have when diagnostic imaging is actually the tool in radiology. So it's different in the sciences is my takeaway.
Okay, well, we're starting to run a little bit short on time, and we've got some questions coming in from attendees. So if we could kind of do a lightning round and answer these really big, complex questions in very short sound bites. We've got a question referring back to Dr. Siegel's comments on the challenges of combining a research AI approach or program and scaling it into production PACS workflow. The question is, could you describe solution for facilitating that workflow? Huge question, short time. Elliot, who would you direct that to?
Jump in.
Yeah. I mean, I would start out with Dan, but I think it's a great question for anybody. I guess the question is, how do you deal with folks that want to have an integrated research PACS and a clinical PACS, and folks that are doing research, as so many of our attendees are, that are, I imagine, similar to me, frustrated with the idea of not really having a research infrastructure necessarily included with either advanced visualization systems or PACS systems.
Yeah, I'll just give you a few thoughts quickly, lightning round space. It's a space that I think is quickly evolving, right? We're hearing more and more about the need to combine, sort of the clinical aspects and the research aspects, both within academic medical institutions like yourselves. Also, we're hearing it from payers and from the life science companies. So I don't have the exact answer as to when and how, but as the need, again, is as the need from the market is pulling it, vendors, and we're one of them, we're taking a look at this, is how do you more seamlessly integrate what each individual sort of institution or case is trying to accomplish. So not a perfect answer, but we've seen a lot of momentum, and we've heard a lot of momentum around this over the last let's say 24 months.
Thanks. We have another lightning question, I guess, to Mitch. Mitch, you mentioned a program called Advocate. Is this a service to procure curated data sets for algorithm training? And if so, how are they curated? Bounding boxes or how?
Sure. So yeah, Advocate AI is something that does automate the de-identification and curation. Can be measurements extracted from the images. It is a service, and I'm happy to have someone contact me and talk about it offline. But it is a data cooperative that we're now offering to the market.
Thanks. Cynthia, there's other questions. You want to take one?
So at the moment, the commercial AI tools and such, and companies are being asked to prove the effectiveness of their solution to cut through the skepticism, build adoption. In this phase, whether we're looking for commercial return investment or improved quality, safety, this effectiveness needs to be proven. What are the observations of the panel on, I guess, this phase of having to prove the effectiveness? I'm hoping I'm interpreting that question correctly.
I can answer that question. So again, if there is a healthcare system, especially an academic one, research one, they have a startup, that will come to them. They should have like a track record on publication and reputation in that again in that domain, and also they should have like a strong. Again, it doesn't mean that like I will refuse the young startups that like they have knowledge and they are bright team, but again we want to make sure that they can integrate their systems with the infrastructure in the hospital and the workflow, and also they have trained their data, or even they will create something specific for that healthcare system. And the data should be again, we're facing now an ethics in AI, and again like we should see a data set that is like very balanced, not from like only specific hospital or a geographical area, but it should be expanding beyond that.
Okay. Elliot?
Yeah, so there's an interesting question that's been posed that, as Dr. Shura mentioned, the companies in general that are offering AI are offering fairly limited things that, chest radiographs, mammography, some of the CT applications are relatively narrow. And this question asks, is there a chance to witness some sort of consortium or union of AI companies that would essentially have more of a global or worldwide vision for AI and medical imaging, so that there might be the capability to be able to more rapidly deploy a greater number of algorithms and develop algorithms more quickly? So I guess one question is, are there any efforts that you're aware of potentially to be able to have companies get together and cooperate in some sort of a consortium that might work together to facilitate and accelerate the development of AI algorithms? Or you don't really see that coming at this point, and whose role might it be to be able to organize such a thing?
So as usual, healthcare is again lagging behind like other technology that we're going to be using every day. And we have seen any AI technology, mostly it's like embedded or acquired by a large company. Unfortunately, now we start using like some of the AI startups start using Facebook algorithms because they are detecting that, or they have a technology in detecting the faces and the features. So I haven't seen beside the marketplace again that like even some of us like have developed to invite the companies. Recently again at Paxera again we decided to launch a platform that will make it soon open source, that will invite algorithms again to be fully integrated, and a lot of development tools will help healthcare systems to develop their own algorithms, by some tools that can be available for them. So again, that was an effort from our side, but I haven't seen anything like a global effort to unify, or again, like having more algorithms to be developed. And like how many algorithms would see like per year, how many body parts would be tackling, and we have seen the AI helping us to do it.
We've seen IHE integrating the healthcare enterprise do some interesting work in trying to promote mechanisms to be able to use current and existing standards to be able to advance AI integration also. Mitch or anybody else, do you see any industry efforts that may cut across different companies that might organize some of these ways to be able to accelerate the integration and interoperability of AI, or is that something for the American College of Radiology or RSNA or societies? Who do you see as potentially playing a preeminent role in moving things forward?
So real quick, the subcommittee, when we interviewed industry about this, and we interviewed not just the SIM member companies, we went outside the member companies, and thank you to those on the panel that participated as well. People were looking, the industry was looking for collaboration and not waiting for IHE, although they feel IHE ultimately has tremendous benefit. We heard about Manai yesterday. From NVIDIA, that was an open platform for validating training and potentially in a later release integrating. So I think that industry is seeing that AI has to come together, but it doesn't eliminate the fact that you'll have 6 algorithms for pneumothorax and 12 for brain infarct. So I don't think it's synonymous to say that collaboration means consolidation. At the same time, there will be obviously some that collaborate and consolidate together.
Great. It looks like we're out of time, so thank you all for a fascinating and really engaging discussion. Thanks for allowing yourselves to be put on the spot with questions from me and Cynthia and the audience also. And I know I personally learned a lot and really appreciate a really fantastic panel. So thanks so much. Cynthia, any parting comments?
I just agree, and I'm enthusiastic. There's problems, and it sounds like there's thoughts being given to how we're going to solve them. So I appreciate the work you're all doing in this field.
That sounds great. And I know we have a really interesting keynote presentation coming up at 1 o'clock. So we have just about 13 or 14 minutes to get ready for that. And very much looking forward to that as well. Nikki, anything else?
No, that's it. Thank you, everybody, again,
Great.
and have a great day.
Thank you.
You too. Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks.